Welcome to the 100% Wild Podcast. I'm Mark Kenyon with Wired to Hunt. Next to me here, I like the fact that you're next to me.
Yeah, that's a nice change.
We got Matt Drury with Drury Outdoors, and we're talking deer today.
Shocker.
I know, right? And I can't complain.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is it right now? It's March, but already I've got the itch. I literally last night, and this is weird, but I was last night sitting in the hotel room, and I couldn't sleep, and I was like, I need to watch some deer hunting videos. So I watched some of your guys' videos on YouTube just to kind of scratch that itch, and already I'm dying to get out
You're
there.
ate up with it.
Always. So we've got a guest who I think is also ate up with it. Who do we have with us today?
We have Jay Gregory joining us again today. He's been doing it archery-only style for a long, long time. One of the longest-running hunting shows out there at the Wild Outdoors, and longtime friend of our family, of our company, and one heck of a deer hunter.
Thanks for joining us, Jay.
How are you guys doing?
Good, buddy. Now you got to live up to that awesome intro.
I don't know if I can live up to that or not, but thank you anyway.
You know what? I forgot to mention, drummer extraordinaire.
Really?
Did you know that Jay was a part of an 80s cover band called Love Pump for a long, long time?
I did not know
that.
Yeah. That's awesome. He's got the shirt to prove it.
On. There you go. It's one of the most entertaining shows you will ever see. I've had the pleasure of getting to see him a few different times. And I didn't even mention, and a heck of a golfer too, right? You were a golf pro for a while there, weren't you?
Really?
Yeah, it was. I still play a little bit. I'm trying to anyway, and I guess it's what is that old saying? Wears all the hats, master of the none. What's that?
Jack of all trades, master of none.
Jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if that's true though, Jay, because everything I've heard is that you are a master
of at least one here.
At least one more thing, which is the whole deer hunting deal. So we're gonna.
I don't know. I enjoy doing all of it, so I enjoy all of it.
We're gonna pick your brain here again today with some more deer hunting questions. You probably should talk turkey too, but everybody's always ate up with deer hunting, so that's where we're gonna start.
Yeah. So should we get to our question of the day?
Yeah, the question of the day is brought to you by Cabela's, the world's foremost outfitter.
And in that question of the day, unlike most of our other podcasts, it's not a call-in, it's not a listener submitted. This is a host submitted question. I'm gonna give the question of the day today because Jay, I've heard a lot about your ability to target specific bucks. And that's something that so many of us now are trying to do more and more. We're getting to know deer, and we're trying to hunt just that one. So my question for you, Jay, and I'd love to dig in with a whole bunch of follow-up questions. My first question is, at a high level, how do you approach that challenge? How do you figure out and hunt one single specific buck?
Well, I mean, it's really tough, to be honest with you. Probably the biggest thing, killing a big deer, this is going to sound really weird for me to say this, but killing a big deer is not nearly as tough as finding a big deer. Mm-hmm. That's usually the tough part. So, it all starts with it starts with good management practices, obviously, to get your property to where, or to hunt in a state where they have, mature whitetails and they get to 4.5, 5.5, 6.5 years old. Having said that, once you're in an area that's got that type of a deer, then you got to find him. And usually the way, we find them is through summertime scouting, putting out the bio rocks, the trophy rocks, the minerals, putting cameras on them, running those all the time until you find that deer. Then once you find the deer, then it's a matter of trying to keep track of him as time goes on through the summer and you get into, the early part of the season and then the rut. And, obviously I'm not a big fan of the rut. I'd much rather try and kill a deer before the rut happens in the early season. I think that's when you've got a better chance of maybe finding, figuring him out. I'll go back and I'll tell a real quick story about a deer that I shot. One of the only big deer I've ever shot early. It was in, I can't remember what year it was, but it was October 10th, and I'd actually hung the stands for this deer in February the previous year when I was shed hunting, and I found his rubs and I kind of found his bedroom. And I'd been hunting this deer for a couple years, but I'd never seen him in person, but I'd found his sheds. And it was ironic that his bedroom that I had found was not that far from where I was finding his sheds, where I was getting all the summertime pictures of him, but I never could see him during hunting season. So I kind of decided that I was going to hang a stand in this spot, knowing that it was a one and done. This spot was so tight, and there was going to be no way to get out of there in the morning after I hunted it without probably spooking him if he was there. So I waited till my first north wind. We went in, we got in that tree, and sure enough, about 9 o'clock in the morning, I saw him coming through the bottom timber eating acorns, and he took forever. I mean, he was taking one step at a time, but he took one step at a time all the way up through the timber, and I shot him at 10 yards right underneath the tree. And that was probably one of the most memorable hunts I've ever had, from the standpoint of it took me like 3 years to figure this deer out. He was right there under my nose the whole time, but it was just a situation where all the pieces finally came together in just finding his bedding area and his rubs, and knowing where he was shedding his horns and spending most of his time, during the summer. And it all just kind of led to one spot, and luckily there was a big tree there that I could get in.
So on the topic about finding those pieces and putting all those pieces together, can you tell us specifically how you're specifically scouting? What things are you looking for when you're scouting on the ground? What things matter? What things don't? And then I think you're talking about some trail camera use too, maybe. Could you elaborate on that as well?
Well, trail cameras are a huge part nowadays. I mean, everybody knows that, whether it's a cell camera or a regular SD cam, because it's real-time information for you. I mean, you right then that deer's there or has been there. Obviously, food plays a big part. Cover plays a big part. Rubs will actually give away a lot of information about deer too, especially their travel corridors and where they're moving from food to bedding. Generally, if you're finding, if you're after one particular deer, let's say this deer's got, he's got something funny off of his base that is going to raise, havoc on a tree whenever he rubs it, you'll be able to figure out his rubs pretty quick usually. So I like to really pay a lot of attention to rub lines and where they're going from food to bedding. And then obviously scrapes. The thing about scrapes that are a little bit difficult is that, it's kind of like a dog. It's kind of like having a fire hydrant in the city. If there's a bunch of dogs that come through there, they're all going to hit that. They're all going to pee on that fire hydrant. It's kind of the same thing with a scrape. People always talk about, well, it's a huge scrape. Well, yeah, it's because 10-year-and-a-half-old bucks are using that same scrape. Not to say the big ones aren't too, but I really like to key in on big rubs and taking rubs from feeding areas to bedding areas. I think draws a really good picture of what these deer are doing, especially in the earlier part of the season.
That's interesting, because I feel like so many times people get honed in on the scrape. You know what I mean? And because it's maybe it's because it's usually easy to hang your camera right on a scrape or something, but I feel like you hear more about a scrape than a rub.
Yeah, especially with trail camera pictures, like you said.
Yeah.
I feel like we talk a lot about how those can be great places to get those pictures and get inventory of bucks. But I wonder, do you think, Jay, that trail camera pictures on a scrape are less helpful from a patterning perspective? Because, like you said, it's just that fire hydrant effect, and these deer are hitting that lots of times in the middle of the night maybe. I mean, is that a less valuable scouting tool when you're trying to kill that deer?
No, well, here's the thing about scrapes and the cameras on them. It's the best place to take your inventory of what you've got once season gets to going. I mean, there's nothing better. And I'm not saying you can't kill a big deer on a scrape. If you get a deer that you're patterning to a scrape, awesome. That's a super place to set up. I was just kind of reflecting back on from the early part of the season, whenever these deer come out of velvet, and you're trying to figure out where they're at early on. Those rubs from the feeding where you've been getting pictures of them all summer, those pictures or those rubs that you find near the feeding area to the bedding area, I think really kind of paint a story of where that deer's going.
All right, so Jay, when it comes to that, to what you're doing there with the rubs, can you elaborate on, when are you actually going in to look at that stuff? I mean, you're talking about, early in the season. So are you actually going in and seeing a new rub line pop up on October 1st, and then you're hunting that because it's backing up into a bedding area? Or are you talking about using that data and applying that to future years? I mean, how much of that time thing is going through there?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think it gets very tough to do a lot of scouting during the season for obvious reasons. For one, you don't want to bump the deer out of there. In a lot of situations, I'll look at the sign after the season's over with. I'll really try and pay attention to, just like the deer I was talking about earlier. I knew where he fed because there was a little alfalfa field, and I knew that I'd got all my pictures of him all summer there. So I knew that's where he was hanging out in the summertime. That's why I went in later on after the season was over when I couldn't kill him, and I went up into the area that I thought possibly he was utilizing. And that's when I found all the big rubs. So I kind of already had that in my head for the following year that this is where that deer is going. So when I went back in that summer and I started getting pictures of him in the same exact spots again, all the same rubs and scrapes started opening up around this field. I already had an idea that that's the direction he was going to be going. And it was totally opposite of the way I'd been hunting him before. I mean, I had no idea he was going the other direction. So looking at those rubs and taking them away from early season feeding, I think will give you a good idea of what this deer is doing in the early season to kill him before the rut kicks in, and then they get almost impossible to figure out because you never know where they're going to be. But the scrapes, like we've talked about before, the scrapes are a great place to take inventory of all the bucks that are coming through there then. And if you get a buck that is, I've not hunted very many bucks that have been very patternable on scrapes, but I know guys that have and have had luck. And so if you do get on a scrape where it's consistent, especially if you're running a wireless camera, great place to kill him. I mean, because he'll tell you when you'll get a pattern of when he is checking it, whether it's early morning, late evening, whatever. So,
yeah.
That makes any sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And, I feel like there's a couple different schools of thought when it comes to using trail cameras to pattern deer, at least from all the different people I've talked to. I mean, I know some guys who do what you just said there. They've got their cameras on their scrapes and then maybe on food sources, and they're just seeing, okay, when are the deer hitting these two things, scrapes to get an inventory, who's in the area, are they starting to move a little bit more, and then, on the other side, when are they hitting food? That's kind of what I do. But then there's other people I know, especially when they're trying to target one deer, they will have maybe their trail camera started like that, and then when they figure out that the buck that they're after maybe is using this area, then they'll start moving all their cameras into that area and start adjusting their trail camera location to try to narrow down specific trails or specific times or anything like that. How far do you take your trail camera work to scout specific deer? Are you just keeping it in one place and
I'm too
leaving
scared
it?
to do that.
Yeah, or do you do this whole adjustment thing that some people do?
Oh, I'm definitely adjusting them when season comes. For sure, obviously, scrapes are the most important as far as trying to find where he's at. Especially if you're scouting to hunt then. The whole rub thing the scenario that I painted before was more of a situation of trying to figure out a buck that I couldn't figure out before. I couldn't figure out where he was going. So, that's why I went in after season and kind of figured him out, and then I was able to kill him next year. If I've got a particular deer that I'm trying to kill right now, there's no better way than to run the cameras, and scrapes are the best place to start. And then, like I said, if you find a buck that's hitting a scrape, then you're going to know that at least you should be in that area. If not set up over that scrape, at least close enough to where maybe you can see that deer crossing the field or cutting through a timber, cutting across the ridges. Keep him on the upwind side, get on the horns of the grunt tube and try and get him to come to you, which is very, very, very doable, especially that time of year. I mean, that's one of the most successful tactics that I've ever, that we always use every year is you see one moving and you let him get to the upwind side, then try and call him to you. Then you've got as good a chance then at killing him as you're ever going to.
So you're talking late October, early November, or what time of year there?
Yeah, you're talking 20th of October on, through, anytime probably in November if you catch him in the right mood. But my favorite is that if you could just figure out when that exact time is, but that early part right before they really start breeding, they can get very, very. They'll come to a call, and they're looking, and they hear two bucks. And if I like to be able to see a deer I'm calling to, so I can kind of take his temperature too. You can see what he likes, what he doesn't like. I'm not a big fan of blind rattling anymore because most of the time they circle downwind, and unless you're in a spot where they can't get downwind of you, I think a lot of times you call in deer you never see. So
yeah. So, on the scrape side of things, and you're talking about patterning the deer, getting them coming to those scrape sites. For me, what I've noticed on my lease, it's all so random. It seems like. Is that what you notice? I mean, it's like I don't know how to pattern them.
I've had both. I've had some deer where it seems totally random, and then there's some deer, like we talk about sometimes, they seem to have unique personalities. Like with Holyfield, that's one of the most relatively patternable. I mean, he's like a homebody. He's got a very tight core, so I know with more consistency than many other deer I've hunted that he's going to do some common things. But then it seems like there's other deer that are the exact opposite. I don't know what you've seen, Jay.
And in today's whitetail world, I mean, our deer numbers are so high and we have so many does too. I mean, let's face it, a buck doesn't have to work real hard to find a doe. So, that's why I say the scrapes early on in the season can give you a good inventory, but to actually hunt, in my experience, to actually hunt over a scrape and kill one, I've not been that successful with that scenario. And I think a lot of it has to do with there's just, a big mature buck, let's face it, he's going to get the first doe in the area. And then once he loses her, how long is it going to take him to find another one? He not very long. And
you
that's
better
what
be
makes
in the
him
right
so hard to
place.
kill once a rut starts.
Yeah, you better be in the right place at the right time in that instance.
You got to catch him in between. Yeah.
Speaking of timing, I imagine when you're hunting one of these specific deer, you're mentioning this different type of scouting you're doing, but I'm sure, or at least I'm assuming, that you're probably not going and hunting all the time. I imagine you're probably trying to balance, learning about the deer and putting in opportunities to hunt him, but also not hunting him at the wrong times. Can you tell us how you think about that? How do you decide when to go in? How do you decide when to be aggressive and when not to be?
You absolutely got to be really careful about what the times that you do go in. Obviously, wind is going to play the biggest part of that situation. You're going to have certain stands in certain areas that you're going to be able to get into and you're going to be able to hunt. And then you're going to have some that are going to be very difficult. The one thing about picking a stand location in that scenario is, and why you have to be really careful is sometimes what people don't really think about is they think about, okay, well, I can go in and get in the stand and I can hunt it because I'm going in the morning. I know the deer are going to be in the field way north of me. The wind's out of the north. They're going to be coming back in there, and then, the bedding area, wherever it is. But you're leaving scent on the way in and on the way out. So you got to be really careful. If you're hunting an area too much, you're probably going to be throwing up red flags. And so that's why you got to be super, super careful. Pick your best time. Watch the pressure, the barometer pressure, watch the wind, the time of year, and just try and pick that super time to get in there. And when all the stars kind of align, then your chances are so much better of actually killing that deer. Think about your barometric pressure, your wind direction, your entry and your exit out of a stand. So, and obviously the time of year is going to make a big difference. So you kind of put all those things together, and you need to be really careful about overhunting a spot. And when everything comes together, I mean, that's the time to go in and try it. We all have those trees that we can't wait to get in every year. We just got to wait till the right time to get in them. We don't want to burn them before it gets good.
Can you overhunt a spot during the rut? So say your wind, is decent. A lot of people always say, oh, it's the rut. Anything can happen. They'll come from anywhere. So it almost doesn't matter the wind direction, but it does. I know it does. Yeah. But, if you have high pressure and you're sitting on the side of a ridge in the morning and, so you think I can do no wrong, and you keep going in there, each morning. Is there a point there where you're just hurting your odds?
Well, I think that will answer itself by how many deer you start not seeing every day that you go back in there. It'd be like going to an outfitter that takes a hunter into the same spot every day, and I know that happens sometimes. I mean, it definitely has an effect because, it's not just while you're there hunting, but you have to remember you got to get into that stand and get out of that stand, and you're leaving a scent trail on the way in and on the way out. So you're creating a barrier, and you're letting those deer know. Those deer are out there 24 hours a day, and they walk around more in the dark than they do in the daylight. So every time we leave scent out there and we think, well, nothing came across, nothing knew I was there, we don't know how many deer crossed our trail after we left in the dark that night. And, you're just educating them. So, yeah, I think it can definitely I think it can definitely harm your spot if you continually hunt it. Now, if you hunt it smart, you've got a good entry and exit, and you're only hunting on good winds, and it is during the rut, you could probably get away with a little bit more. If you're going to push the envelope, that's the time of year maybe to do it. But you got to be really careful.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Well, we have to wrap things up here pretty quickly, Jay, but I want to ask you one last question, and maybe it's related to this topic of hunting a single specific buck. Maybe it's something different, but I was just kind of curious. What is one thing that you do that's very different than most other hunters that you think helps you in some way? Is there anything out there that you do that just not most people are?
I sneak in and poach on Mark's ground.
Well, there it is.
I'm kidding. I don't know that there's anything special that I do. I just love I love deer hunting. I love trying to figure them out. For me, it's a 365-day-a-year deal. I mean, I'm running cameras right now on deer that are shed, and I'm already trying to figure out which deer they are by the size of the hole on the top of their heads on my farm. So it's just something I really enjoy doing. I think, and for me now, it's about my kids. Wyatt's 19, Whitley's 9, and it's so much fun for me to pass that along to them. And Whitley killed her first deer last year with a bow, and so I'm trying to teach her and do the right things, and teach her the right things. And so it just makes me be a little bit more careful. And I think, I'm very fortunate, as Mark and Terry and Matt are, that we get to hunt a lot. We're out there all the time. So I do get to pick and choose the best times at the best spots on my farms. And I think that, being patient, I think helps, having patience. And I just really enjoy what I do. So, I love hunting whitetails. I just love whitetails in general. So I don't know that I really do anything special, to be honest with you.
Well, one thing that I always pick up on these guys that are killing big deer consistently, like Jay and Mark and, on the stand pots, their aggressive nature in hunting, it's a little different so they take all these pieces of the puzzle, they put them together, but they get aggressive when the time is right. And it's just, I think it's the difference in killing that upper end next level whitetail as opposed to not.
Yeah.
I mean, it's something that either you got it or it's hard to learn how to do that. I mean, you can obviously pick up on these tips from these guys, but it's either kind of in your nature or it isn't.
Right.
If you're not an aggressive guy and everything you do in general, I mean, it may not be in you to say, all right, I found out where he's at and the wind's right. Today I'm crushing into his bedroom or whatever. I mean, that's I don't know if you've noticed that, Jay, with the people that that kill big deer, but that seems to be a common trait almost.
Yeah, knowing when to go for the kill and then knowing how to do it.
Yes.
Yeah, it's definitely picking it's picking your spots and your times. I mean, and a lot of it's a guess. I mean, obviously, I've guessed way more times wrong than I've guessed right. But if you're out there enough times, I mean, the law of averages does catch up.
So you're saying there's a chance?
Yes, there's a chance. Well, Jay, thank you so much for sharing all this with us. This has been super helpful, and I know this coming fall, I think we'll all be able to take a little bit of these different pieces of ideas and putting them into play in our own seasons.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. It's always a pleasure and any time.
Thank you, Jay. I need to go hang a set.
Well, real quick, for those out there watching and listening, just a reminder, you can subscribe to the audio version on iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play, and you can submit your own question at wiredtohunt.com/100%wild.
And you can always watch the video version of this podcast at the Drury Outdoors YouTube channel. And while you're there, check out all the original hunts, the DoD TV episodes, and Killing It in the Kitchens. And as always, follow us on social media, or druryoutdoors.com.
Awesome. Thanks so much for listening.
Peace.